this day in history, more or less, the United States held its first presidential election. Not everybody voted on the same day, but January 7th of 1789 was kind of the heart of the voting. They didn't go to the first Tuesday in November system till the mid-19th century. And in that election, it would have been fun to be a pollster, or at least easy, because of all things, George Washington won, sort of unanimously, as everybody had known that he would. He was the nation's leading citizen. Everybody supported him for president. Even the people running against him supported him for president. And in fact, one of the reasons the Constitution got ratified at all is that even people worried about creating a strong national government were convinced that since the first president would obviously be George Washington and he would never do a mean or dishonorable thing, it wouldn't abuse its powers. He would set healthy precedents. And in some ways he did. But there's one precedent he didn't set, and that was, as in his first election, in his second election, he got one vote from every member of the Electoral College and was overwhelmingly chosen as president. But elections rapidly became partisan affairs, and Americans didn't want that to happen. They were very afraid of it, including Washington himself. In his farewell address, he warned of the baneful effects of party. They hoped for kind of public-spirited disinterestedness in which everybody would unite behind the leading candidate. But public affairs don't work that way. In fact, they didn't even work that way in the Washington administration. And so when he decided to step down, among other things, he was tired of the abuse of politics. He complained about being buffeted by infamous scribblers, which I think is a wonderful turn of phrase most modern politicians couldn't manage. He stepped down partly because his own cabinet was divided between the emerging Federalist and Democratic Republican views of public affairs. And so in the election to succeed Washington in 1796, it was a contest between his vice president, John Adams, and Adams' chief rival, Thomas Jefferson. But the problem was the United States Constitution wasn't set up to accommodate partisan differences. The way the Electoral College worked at the time is each elector got 2 votes, and whoever got the most votes became president. Whoever got the second most became vice president. They didn't vote separately. Adams became Washington's vice president because he was first among the kind of second tier of people. But in 1796, when Adams won the presidency, his chief rival, of course, got the second most votes. That's Jefferson. So he became Adams' vice president, even though they were hardly on speaking terms. Then, in the election of 1800, something even worse happened. It was another Jefferson versus Adams match. But the deal among the Democratic Republicans was that at least one elector would cast his second vote for somebody other than Jefferson's running mate. That's Aaron Burr. So Jefferson would come first and Burr would come second. They were pretty confident they would beat the Federalists, and they did. The problem is that elector either broke the deal or flubbed it. And so Jefferson and Burr got the same number of votes. The election was a tie. It was cast into the House of Representatives. And the House was still the old Federalist House, so it came down, in fact, to John Adams to choose who would be president. And he finally concluded that much as he hated Thomas Jefferson, he was at least an honorable man, whereas Aaron Burr was a complete wretch and a bum. And so he convinced his Federalist colleagues to vote for Jefferson. After that, they fixed up the system. They separated the votes for president from vice president in the Electoral College, and problems of this sort didn't arise again. But there's a lasting lesson here, which is that even when you're all agreed that George Washington is a really great guy, and you're not all agreed that John Adams or Thomas Jefferson is, you need political parties. You need them to present clear choices. You need them to clarify the decision-making process, to give people meaningful options. Between two men of sterling character, you still have to know who favors high tariffs, who favors low tariffs, who is suspicious of revolutionary France, who is suspicious of the Britain we just staged a revolution against, or if those seem out of date, who wants to raise the minimum wage, who wants to lower the minimum wage, who thinks government debt is dangerous, who doesn't, who favors a robust military role abroad, who thinks we should just exert a good influence, or in fact should ignore the world totally. Political parties appeared in the United States very quickly, despite the wishes of virtually everybody involved, including the people who formed the parties, like Jefferson and Adams, and people like Washington, who everybody agreed stood above party. You just couldn't prevent it from happening. And that's why the first American election, although it's inspiring for having George Washington win, and he really was the best candidate and a great man, was a really bad precedent in terms of trying to have politics without competitive platforms and competitive parties. Luckily, Washington didn't set a precedent in that regard. American democracy and everybody's democracy is much healthier for it. I still would have voted for him, I gotta say, in the first American election, though.